Hello, and welcome to Lion and Mouse Commentary. I'm Tori, and this is my best friend, Holland.
Hello.
If you're new to our show, we rank various forms of entertainment by different categories out of a total score of 10, with only 2 points allowed for our personal taste. We break everything down as we go, so don't worry, you won't get confused. Feel free to agree, disagree, or just find something new to enjoy. And be sure to tread lightly. We always have hot takes and spoilers. Cut to the intro. Okay, today I chose the live-action Netflix adaptation of One Piece, the first episode for us to review. This is technically blind to us both because it's brand new. Here's some background and facts before we jump into things. So, the live-action adaptation of One Piece, it's on Netflix. It was released on August 31st, 2023. It's directed by Mark Jobst. I might be saying that wrong. I'm sorry. Jobst. It's developed by Matt Owens and Steven Maeda. And it's based on the 1997 manga One Piece by Eiichiro Oda, which then was turned into an anime that's very long running and still running. It was produced and filmed in South Africa, which I found interesting. There's 8 episodes on Netflix. They run between 49 and 63 minutes each. Here's a fun fact that I thought was crazy. The budget for these 8 episodes is $138 million. It is reportedly Netflix's second highest budget ever. The only thing beating it is the 4th season of Stranger Things, which had a budget of $270 million.
Wow.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
So they have put a lot of money into this show. It stars, I'm probably going to mispronounce things again, I apologize. Stars Inaki Godoy, Emily Rudd, McKenyu, Vincent Regan, and Morgan Davies. All of those characters do appear in the first episode, so that's why I wanted to mention them. This is the synopsis and a few other facts that I got off of Wikipedia. The series follows the adventures of the Straw Hat Pirates as they explore the dangerous oceans, lands, and beyond in search of the One Piece, a fabled treasure that will make their captain, Monkey D. Luffy, king of the pirates. But the Marines are on their ship's tail, and they are not the only crew searching for the One Piece. Armed with skills and an unbreakable friendship, the Straw Hats are ready for the journey and even more ready to fight for their dreams together. So that's the synopsis of the show, and then here's some more facts. In its debut weekend, the show's concurrent viewership on Netflix reached number 1 in 84 countries, surpassing the Netflix debut records previously set by Stranger Things and Wednesday. It topped the weekly global Netflix chart from August 28th to September 3rd, ranking among the top 10 viewed shows in 93 countries and number 1 in 46 countries, with 140 million hours watched by 18.5 million viewers. According to Forbes, several days after release, the show's Rotten Tomatoes audience rating had 95%, and it became the highest ever for a Netflix show with more than 10,000 audience reviews on the site. So it's only been out for a little while at the time of this recording, and it's already stupid popular and has a really high rating. So there's lots of hubbub so far about this adaptation. So that being said, do you want to kick us off with our first?
Sure. No problem. So our first category for TV shows is plot, story, and cohesion. So we are only reviewing the first episode. I actually have not continued to watch any episodes after the first episode. And so don't come at me for my critiques on this episode because I haven't watched anything else. And I think personally that your first episode of a season, that's what's going to hook your audience in or make them not continue. So, out of a possible score of 2, I actually gave the plot, story, and cohesion 1 out of 2 points. Overall, I would not call myself a One Piece fan. I did enjoy watching parts of the show, but I did not have cable TV growing up. So I watched the good old hated 4Kids dubbed One Piece. And that is nostalgic for me. So if you hate it, I don't blame you, but it's all I had. And so it was picked up. The episodes that aired on Saturday morning for me as a kid was, the middle of the anime. I didn't have anything before, and it was probably the same, like 12 episodes every time. So it, I have a very limited knowledge of the source material. So I'm not giving this score any credit for the original source material. So I just have to kind of give that little disclaimer, because people are going to be like, but One Piece, the plot of One Piece is so good. Fair, but Netflix didn't come up with the plot of One Piece. They have adapted the plot of One Piece. So they shouldn't, in my opinion, I think, in being a fair evaluator in this podcast that we're doing, I think it's fair to not give them credit for all the work of the anime and the manga that came before them. Netflix doesn't get points for that. They get points for how they've adapted that source material into this. So that's why my score is a little low by comparison to what I think a lot of people would rank One Piece. Is one, because we're limited to one episode, and two, I'm critiquing Netflix for Netflix and not giving them credit for work they didn't do. So all that to say, I just feel like I need that disclaimer, because I know there's a huge...
I'll have a different disclaimer as well, so it's fine.
So I just know that this show has a great fandom. I enjoyed watching the little 4Kids dub that everybody hates when I was a kid. So I do enjoy One Piece, but this is very different from that source material. I think overall, the biggest reason why I gave this 1 out of 2 points is because I feel like this plot in this first episode has really good bones, but it lacks a lot of substance. It really doesn't give us a lot of compulsion to care about this plot. So the opening of the plot, I think it's fantastic, with Gold Roger, and kind of his treasure is hidden somewhere and you go find it, that whole crux of the plot. It's pulled directly from the anime. It feels like it's shot for shot, which, falls into aesthetics. So, but it's a great intro. It really sets the tone. And then I feel like that's kind of where all the positives kind of end in the plot of this first episode. A lot of the plot, I first of all, I don't really like that fourth wall intro of Luffy talking to the camera, and then it's a fake out. He's talking to a seagull. That is so tropey to me. Like, why? How many times are we going to do this? It immediately makes it feel like I'm watching a kid's show, when I think that the content of One Piece can be much more mature than a little kid's show. So I really didn't like it. I thought it wasn't the best intro to our main characters, our protagonist, which you could argue that Monkey D. Luffy is the protagonist of the whole show. Mm-hmm. They kind of, I didn't catch this, but in the opening with Gold Roger, he talks about his treasure is hidden. That's kind of the crux, and all these people are trying to find it. That's the MacGuffin, if you will, of the plot. I don't recall if in this adaptation, and maybe I'm just misremembering the anime, but I believe the whole point is that whoever finds the treasure becomes king of the pirates. Mm-hmm. I don't recall if that was explicitly said in this adaptation, but the whole plot, because I know from the manga and the anime that is why Luffy talks all the time about becoming king of the pirates. It's because he's wanting to find Gold Roger's treasure. But I felt like this plot, that's the main plot of the entire show, and I don't feel like Netflix communicated that to the audience. So here we have this big grand opening of this mysterious pirate treasure, and now our main protagonist is just talking about becoming king of the pirates, and you're like, well, pirates have kings? This doesn't make any sense. Why is he this? None of it was really told and connected. That, you got to connect the dots for your audience if they have no idea what the source material is about. So that alone kind of started the problem with this plot, is that we don't really understand what the stakes are, and why should we care about the plot of this show, regardless of caring about the characters. Just why should we care that Monkey D. Luffy, he wants to be king of the pirates, and he's trying to find a crew? Like, it's very introductory, very rudimentary, and there's not enough stakes given into the plot as to why we should really care. The flashback scenes with Luffy kind of give us good insight to Shanks, but they don't really give us a whole lot of information about Luffy as a character, and Shanks is not present. So we're watching these flashbacks. We're kind of seeing this relationship that Luffy had with Shanks, and it's interesting. But again, there's no compulsion. Like, why should we care about this man who seems to care for Luffy when Luffy was a child? But he's not there. So it's clearly somehow he's out of the picture. But we don't really see any of that impacting Luffy. We just get this informational flashback. We don't then see that translate into Luffy's day-to-day life and how that impacted him and who he is now. So, which is kind of a character note, but also that's part of the storytelling. A lot of flashbacks are in this first episode. The plot overall, we're following several lines. We're following, Luffy and his kind of backstory, Nami and her backstory, Zoro and his backstory a little bit, but it all seems really disjointed. It's good. Again, it's good bones. It's really interesting. It's like, oh, this Nami's a really intelligent character and she's trying to get a boat. Oh, we get to watch these kind of fun moments with her. But we don't really know what her objective is. Why is she looking for a map? Why, what's the purpose of this behind this? So while I'm sure we're going to find out as the series moves on, in this first episode, we don't have any reason to understand why this plot is relevant and how this plot ties into the big picture. Same thing, a big moment I realized is in getting towards the end of the episode is, so we understand Luffy's trying to find a pirate crew. Okay, we understand that concept. Nami has a boat and she's trying to find a map, which Luffy also needs, and he needs a map and a boat. So we understand why they kind of end up together. Those plot lines kind of merge. But then here we have Zoro, who Luffy interacts with very briefly, and then we don't have any... His plot that he says, his plot line, if you will, is that he promised he was going to become the world's greatest swordsman. So why in the world did he decide at the end of the episode, oh, I'll just hop on along with Luffy and Nami? They don't have anything that's moving towards my objective. So why is he just, oh, okay, I guess I'll tag along? Like, there's nothing in the plot that gives us any insight as to why this makes sense. And I feel like that's the overall problem with the plot. And again, I'm not trying to like crap on it too much because I understand like, oh, you got to watch the next episode. Oh, you got to keep going. You dig deeper. You're going to learn more. I get that. I really do. But you have to give us something.
Yeah.
And I feel like they gave us almost nothing. It was just A happened, then B happened, then C happened. And we don't get any compulsion or buy-in as an audience of why we really care about this plot. What does the King of the Pirates do? Does he just have this treasure? Does he get to like rule over other pirates? Is there like a pirate army he now commands? Does he like not have a bounty on his head because he's King of the Pirates? Like there's no incentive in the plot as to why Luffy cares about becoming King of the Pirates or why this treasure, obviously a treasure hunt, financial gain, sure, but then why do these people want any of this? And in a way, I guess it is kind of character, it falls into character as well. But I really attribute this to the plot because you're supposed to tell us why I should care about the objective of this entire series, which is to get to the Grand Line and find Gold Roger's treasure and Luffy's becoming King of the Pirates. And I think it's responsible storytelling to give your audience some buy-in in that first episode so that they hit play on the next one. And I think overall, the bones that are really good in this episode, are because of the anime. If you hadn't seen the anime, I don't think this show seems interesting enough to keep watching. And that's just strictly based on the plot. It's like a fun pirate movie. But if you're not a fan of One Piece, I think the score would be even lower for somebody who had never seen One Piece before and didn't know anything about the context, because they would just be like, okay, well, you failed to make me care what the point of the story is. So I don't need to watch anymore because I'm just going to expect more of the same. So I know that's kind of long-winded and a little bit disjointed, but overall, that's why I gave it half credit, because I do think that it has a really good foundation, and I do anticipate, because I know a little bit more about One Piece than what this episode gives me, I know that there's more to the story and that it's gonna unfold, but I just think that it really misses the mark on getting you engaged in that first episode and caring about people and caring about the plot and the stakes and the conflict in this first episode. It really just feels kind of like a lot of one-off, almost like a one-off kids TV show episode, which is, I feel like, a horrible thing to say about something based on an anime that is still running, because it just has that much meat to the material. So all of that to say, 1 out of 2 points, half credit. And again, I think that half credit comes from the source material and not from Netflix's work. So I'm sorry, you can go ahead and hate me now, but that's my reasoning.
Okay. Let me give my disclaimer. I know a lot about One Piece. I've watched over 600 episodes of the anime at this point. There's like 1,100 episodes, so I'm still only barely halfway. But I like this anime a lot, and I've devoted a lot of time to it, and I do not disagree with anything you've said. And I also gave it 1 out of 2 points. Now, I have a different perspective on some of those things. And my challenge with this podcast episode, is that I'm going to try very hard to talk about some of the differences in the source material and this adaptation without letting what I know is coming down the line from the source material affect what I talk about too much. But I think a lot of the problems in the plot of this first episode of this adaptation boil down to the point where they are trying to cram a ton into these 8 episodes. And I understand that condensing things has to happen typically in adaptations like this, but what happens is we are left with a bit of a confusing and empty feeling storytelling for this first episode. A lot of things that are talked about and touched on for half a second and then moved on from are going to be confusing to people who have no knowledge of the anime or manga. And it's tricky. I'm not going to say it's so easy to just, cover all of these things, because I understand you only have so much time and that pacing is going to be tricky. There's a lot to establish. However, I think some of the most important things to establish aren't established well in this first episode. Like you said, I want to talk about, for example, your note about Zoro. Why is he here? We have no explanation. He's the only thing you can really gather is that, he tells Luffy he wants to be the world's best swordsman, and Luffy saves him from the Marines. So he maybe feels a sense of loyalty. And this is all speculation, though, because that's not ever explicitly stated in the dialogue of the first episode. It's just kind of Zoro's oh, this guy's kind of cool and he'll let me be on his boat, so I'm just gonna go with him. But you're I still don't really understand. You're a pirate hunter. You're a pirate bounty hunter. So I'm still not understanding, you trying to chop Luffy's head off while he's sleeping. Help me understand. And we don't get time to dive into that. I do want to talk about I am going to compare a little bit to the source material, okay? They add one significant thing that I'm not really sure how that's going to be explained later if they continue on with this show. And then there are a couple things that are completely missing that I think lessen the impact of some of the story moments. So let me talk about those one by one.
Does this need to have a spoiler warning if you've watched the anime or if you haven't seen the anime?
So this is why it's a challenge. I'm not going to talk about anything other than, well, no, I do have to. Okay. Small spoiler ahead for the lead up and Alabasta arc. If you know what that means and you don't want to be spoiled, then here you go. There's a moment in this first episode where Zoro is approached by a member of Baroque Works. Baroque Works is not a name that we hear, and none of those characters are introduced until like close to 100 episodes into the anime. I'm so confused why this was brought in, because it has no bearing on the rest of this episode or on Zoro as a character. So I'm confused, and maybe there's an explanation that happens later on in the adaptation, but knowing where the adaptation ends in the anime, which I won't say, but like I know where it goes to in the anime, it still should have no bearing. So are they trying to like set up for this to be a long-term running Netflix series? Like, because this is season 4 or 5 of the Netflix adaptation, like that we're talking about here. So I'm confused by that. I'm just confused. I don't understand the addition of that. Spoiler over. Now let me talk about some other things that are different from the source material. Okay, there is a important story moment where Kobe, who is a character that I'll talk about in more depth when we get into characters, but Luffy saves Kobe from Alvida's ship, and Kobe expresses to Luffy that his goal in life is to be a Marine. He wants to be a Marine. And Luffy wants to be king of the pirates. And Kobe acknowledges that, like, how can we be friends? You know, and like, we want opposite things, and the Marines are trying to, you know, snuff out all pirate activity. And, you know, they have some moments, and Luffy kind of talks about how, you know, there are good and bad pirates, and there are good and bad Marines. And they have that sort of establishing moment, sort of like the goal of Luffy not being to do anything nefarious. He's just trying to find the treasure and, like, have a good time. But when Kobe leaves the Straw Hats at the end of this episode, he just leaves. In the anime, there is what I consider to be a very important story moment. And it is because Kobe is a sniveling wimp, and that's established of him. Luffy's like, if you join the Marines, they're going to, like, tear you to shreds. So I'm going to fight you in front of the Marines, and they'll think you're tough. And I think that's a pretty important story moment, especially for the fact that, like, you know, Kobe may not be a huge character, but I think he's one of the, like, important, like, early establishing characters to kind of understand the difference between the Marines and pirates. And that moment is completely gone. They don't fight. I wanted Luffy to punch Kobe in the face. And, well, like...
And the other thing is, I feel like this whole episode focused so much on Luffy and Kobe's relationship, and they didn't... It was really shaky, but you're like, oh, well, maybe it'll, you know, it'll have more depth in future episodes, and then by the end of the episode it's over.
Okay,
so
bye.
We spent all this time watching this interaction between the two of them, and by the end of the episode they
satisfaction.
They part ways, and then we don't even really care that we part ways because we hardly knew them
exactly
at the beginning.
And another thing that, again, is probably due to the fact that they had to condense, and so the pacing feels weird, but Luffy does not meet Zoro and Nami at the same time in the anime. He doesn't do that.
No.
And yet in the show, they're just all at the bar having a brawl, I guess. And, like, did that shot look cool? The choreography was great. I'll talk about it in aesthetics. Yeah, great. But plot-wise, I'm like, we are moving so fast. Why are we moving so fast? And so what happens is that with all of these changes, you know, and they just barely touch on, like, the devil fruit concept, which is important for establishing the world, because the fact that these devil fruits exist and people all around the world have eaten them, and there's only one of each devil fruit or whatever, so everybody who's eaten one has a different power, and you don't know what that is until they tell you or you see evidence of it. And, like, that's important. So when you see if you had no understanding of the anime or manga, you see Luffy stretch and you're like, what the heck is going on here?
Right. It's like, is this a pirate movie or are they superheroes?
Right. Like, and so, like, we do have, you know, the flashback or whatever. But even the flashback doesn't really answer a lot of the questions in regards to, like you said, you know, a lot of the flashbacks focus on Shanks, who is an important character, I will admit. And in the anime, again, it's like he's established as, like, basically being Luffy's dad for all intents and purposes. So, you know, but it's just all glossed over. It's so fast. It's so fast it's glossed over. And so there's so little emotional attachment to these characters if you don't already know who they are. And so I would wager to say that like somebody who is invested in the anime or manga probably is going to go in already having an emotional attachment to these characters, but somebody who's turning on Netflix and saying, oh, what's this number one trending show on Netflix right now? Let me start it. And they're going to be like, I don't understand the motivations of any of these characters because we're not given the moment to do that. So could that happen in a future episode? Could we have those moments with those characters? Sure. But are you going to make it to that episode if everything's so messy right here? Now, I do think that, like, I know I'm sounding very critical, but I think that, like you said, the bones are all there. The basics of the world are given. It's just the knowledge that you need to understand the basics is missing. So that's kind of what I would boil it down to, and why I still gave it 1 point, because it's a tricky world and so much has gone into the building of this world that it is going to be difficult to like nail it, especially in the amount of time that you have to do so. And you don't want to spend so much time on explaining your world that there's nothing happening. So it is a tricky balance, and you know, I don't want to be so critical that I'm like, you know, they just sucked at it. But it's so, I wanted more balance. I think I just wanted more balance between understanding the world and the characters that was going on and like momentum. So I think that we had a little too much momentum and not enough understanding. So 1 out of 2 points for plot, story, and cohesion.
Alrighty. So our next category is characters. So total possible score of 3. And I gave this 1 out of 3 points for characters. And again, I think that a lot of this is the problems with the characters come down to exactly what you were just saying. Like, we just are not given a lot of time to get to know anybody. And another thing, like you said, they could have solved this so easily by having new characters introduced as we go, instead of just dumping like 8 characters in our laps and trying to get us to get to know them all in such a short period of time. Overall, most of the characters just feel very flat and one-dimensional. There are a few exceptions, but pretty much everybody at the beginning of the episode is exactly the same at the end of the episode. There's no growth. There's no character development. We don't really learn anything new about them. We're just watching them do A, then B, then C. We're watching them move through the plot line very linearly, and we're not really learning anything about them as they go. I do think, in regards to the character design and the casting, they were very, very respectful to the original anime. The casting is just done very, very well. The just visually, they look great, but that's kind of where it ends. They have a very pretty facade, and there's just not a lot on the inside. And again, it's no fault of the actors. You know, like you've said many times, it's no fault of the actors, or very rarely the fault of the actors. It's, you know, I think this boils down to the writing and the pacing of the episode. So just go through a couple of the notes I have on the characters individually. I think Luffy just doesn't draw us in as our protagonist. He's supposed to be our main character. He's the main guy. We're supposed to be following him and rooting for him, and it's really, really hard to in this episode. He has this weird juxtaposition between being goofy and being serious that doesn't really fit. He just feels really, really flat. It's in the anime, and I don't want to compare it, but I feel like they did it very well, that Luffy is like over the top, like slapstick comedy, off the wall, no filter. You know, you wonder if he even has a brain in his head, because he's just so like ridiculous. And so I understand that sometimes you have to change those qualities or dial that back down to make your character a little more believable when they're not a cartoon, they're a human actor. But because they tried to do that in this episode, you have these moments where Luffy just speaks very seriously and very monotone, and he's not, he's having a really serious conversation, and then he says something that you would expect from somebody that's like way up here, like wah, all the time. You'd expect that guy to say something just with no filter and off the cuff that really would rub somebody the wrong way and cause a lot of trouble. But then you have this Luffy say that, and you're like, why would he say that? He's an idiot. Or he's mean. Like, why would you say what? And so it's this weird line that they're trying to ride, and they fail on both sides. They don't make him this serious protagonist, and they don't make him this like really goofy, like devil may care attitude guy either. They're trying to make him both, and it just really doesn't work. And I feel like that's a really big problem with your protagonist, because we are seeing this polarizing character qualities, and we are not seeing it reconcile in that character himself. Another thing, and this is no shade to the actors, but it really bothers me that the kid Luffy in the flashbacks does not like he grows up into the adult Luffy. And the actors do a great job, but they don't even speak similarly. It's kind of like if you compare it to something like Tom Hanks in Forrest Gump, the child version of Forrest Gump speaks exactly like the adult version of Forrest Gump. There might be a little changes here and there, but they feel like that child grew up into that man. And I feel like in this episode, that kid did not grow up into this young adult Luffy. They don't look like a younger version of the adult actor. The child actor doesn't look like he's a younger version of the adult actor. They don't speak similarly. It seems like, I don't know if it was just a poor casting choice or if it was just poor directing. But I feel like there could have been a little more cohesion because we rely so heavily on these flashbacks. I've heard of actors that have siblings, and their younger sibling plays a younger version of them, and it works really well. So I feel like there could have been better solutions to that.
Or just better directing.
Yeah, or just better directing. Like, I don't care. You don't have to look like a twin
right.
to play a younger version, but at least have them have similar mannerisms, have them, similar, the way they stand or the way they move or the way they talk, just have something similar so it feels like this is a younger version of the same person. If I didn't know it or wasn't explicitly told it, I would never have known that that's a younger version of Luffy, just because they don't feel like they match. Nami, I think, is a really interesting character in this first episode. She's a really good establishing intro. She's established to be very intelligent. She's really crafty. So she's very interesting, but we get very little of her in this episode. I would say she's probably the most interesting character we have in this episode. Zoro, who was one of my favorite characters in the anime, I don't know how they made a character so cool and so interesting seem so boring. I really, and again, I feel like this is probably a directing choice, and it's nothing against the actor. He looks the part great. I mean, casting's perfect for this guy, but I don't understand, and again, maybe I just missed out on this because I didn't watch the beginning of the anime as a kid, but I don't understand why he has to speak in this completely flat, monotone voice and stay there for the whole episode. And it just, again, I feel like it might be the directing, but it doesn't feel like it fits that actor's voice. Maybe it just doesn't fit his timbre, but he feels like he's doing a fake voice on camera. It's not like he's just really a monotone guy.
I will address this.
It just feels like he's playing or faking a monotone voice that doesn't match what his natural voice sounds like. And then it changes when Luffy rescues him from the field. There's this moment where he smiles for the first time, and now his voice changes.
Yep.
Which is
exactly what I was going to say.
Which is natural for a human. Like, when you smile, your voice changes the way it sounds when you smile. They say you should smile when you talk on the phone, so your voice sounds cheerful. But then, from then on, he doesn't, it's not like we watch this change in Zoro as a character, and now his affect has brightened. Now he's inconsistent. Now he's going back and forth between this completely droll, monotone guy to now he's sometimes a little more smiley. And sometimes he's not. And so now we have this inconsistency because it wasn't a definitive or decisive character moment. It's just, I don't know. Is it bad acting? Is it bad directing? You be the judge. But it's just problematic because now we've established this is one of your main three characters and he's not even interesting to watch on the screen unless he's sword fighting. And then we're watching the choreography. We're not watching him.
Yeah.
And again, kind of going back to the plot, we don't have any understanding of why he's like that or why should we care or what, so it just, he doesn't have any motivation and the portrayal of him just feels just off. Shanks is a great, interesting character. He feels very real and genuine, but he's not in the picture. The captain's son, Captain Morgan's son. Yeah. He's a really interesting character as a villain. He's just really interesting. He's really engaging. But then he's not in the picture. And then Kobe, he is the one character, I think he's the only character we watch that has a little bit of growth and a little bit of change from the beginning to the end of the episode. And then by the end of the episode, he's not in the picture. So the only characters we have that were actually interesting and had some growth and depth to it, aside from Nami, which we still don't know hardly anything about her, but at least she was a little interesting. All the other interesting characters by the end of the episode are out of the show, if you will. Now, I'm sure they'll come back, but pretty much by the end of the episode, we've established these are not our main characters. They're not going to be with us for the rest of this show. So the characters we're left with to carry the weight of the whole series were not even really that interesting. And they weren't very well-rounded, and they didn't have any depth, and we didn't learn anything about them. We just watched things happen to them. And, again, I think the bones are there, like they really are, and only because I've seen parts of the anime, I know that it gets better, and we do learn more about them, but this was your job, Netflix, to give us a little taste of that in this first episode so that we have a reason to continue watching. And I just feel like that wasn't met. They just really missed the mark on that. Even in their interactions with each other, when Luffy and Nami are interacting with each other, it's just, again, it just feels really flat. There's no chemistry between them when they're talking. And I'm not saying that the actors don't have chemistry. Maybe they do in future episodes. So again, I feel like it could be a directing issue. Is like there's no established, friction between them. There's no relationship between them. It's just Luffy saying his lines, Nami saying her lines, and they just are standing in the same room together. But they could have just as easily given their lines on a Zoom call, and it probably would have had the same amount of depth and weight to it. And so I just feel like that's really problematic when these are your characters that are supposed to be carrying the whole show for you. So and I feel like a 1 is kind of generous because I think the character design is done really well. The casting is done really well. The actors really are trying. I mean, I got to give it to them. They're doing their best. And the bones are there the same way the bones are there for the plot. I gave it 1 point out of 3, but I do feel like that's kind of generous. So 1 out of 3 for characters for me.
Okay. I was not as harsh, but I don't tend to be. I'm going to give 2 points out of 3 to characters. I don't disagree with a lot of what you said. I guess my perspective is that a lot of the issues that you listed with characters, for me, are more pacing and plot driven, instead of necessarily they go so closely hand in hand. It's
right.
Hard to differentiate. So again, I don't disagree with a lot of what you said. I just put most of that into plot more than characters. I'll talk about all the good things first, and then I'll talk about the issues that I do have. Like you said, the character design is fantastic. It was one of my biggest worries when I found out that they were going to be doing a live action adaptation of One Piece. I was like, oh no, how are people going to look? Because it's anime. These cartoon characters don't look like real people that you see walking down the street. Like crazy hair and outfits and features and changes to their bodies and like things like that. I was like, how is this going to look like it respects the characters visually in their design, but also makes it feel like they're real people? And I think this is one thing that they got right, is how everybody looks. Even characters like Captain Morgan, who has the axe hand, I was like, how is that going to look? How is his metal jaw going to look? And I think they pulled it off well. Characters like Shanks, I was like, how are they going to do the scar? I don't want it to look cartoony red like it does in the anime, because in the anime you're like, that's fine, I don't care that he's got three big red stripes down his face. But they did the scarring really nicely on the actor for Shanks, and how bright his red hair was. I didn't want that to look goofy either, and it doesn't. It looks like it fits to the character. Zoro's got green hair, and somehow it still looks fine. I was worried about that too. Characters like Kobe, who have like the really big glasses that could look cartoonish, they work well for his face and his pink hair. Like, all of it looks natural to the world, and I was so relieved when they started showing us characters about how everybody looks. Do they show us a lot at one time? Yes. That's that is partly a problem. If you don't know the names of all these people already, you're probably not going to remember half of them at the end of the episode. I think Nami's portrayal is the best one in the whole show, or in that whole episode. Her character, personality, look, it all fits. It all like matches. When Nami was talking, I think she was delivering kind of like the dry sass that Nami has very well. I liked that she didn't try to make her voice sound like the voiceover, like dub, like the English voiceover actors. I was worried that she was going to maybe try to change her pitch. It's her natural voice, the actor's natural voice. I loved that. And I think because of that, she can focus on delivering much better. I felt like her emotion was pretty good. I am confused about her staff. This is maybe I should have put this in a story note. Going back to source material, Nami does not have a staff this early in the show, nor is she a fighter this early in the show. So they make this part of her character that she's just like super wicked awesome with this staff that collapses, and she can just like beat up on people, and she's perfectly capable. And that's not a part of Nami's character in the beginning of the anime. She does not engage in hand-to-hand combat like that. So I was surprised to see that. Do I think that she pulls it off well? Yes. But it's still that's the one inconsistency that I found with Nami's portrayal. Zoro's portrayal. Let's talk about him for a second. Zoro is a cool, aloof, stoic character. Even in the anime, he leaned too far into it. The best moments that we get from Zoro is when we see the facade break. And it happens a couple times in the episode, and they were the best Zoro moments in this episode. And yes, weird thing with the voice he's doing, it feels like he's trying to like emulate the voiceover actor from the anime, and it does sound weird. You know what? Okay, Zoro sounds like when a teenage boy is trying to like impress a girl, so he like talks down here all the time, like, hey, I'm really cool, and he's talking like this, and I'm like, why?
Yeah,
why are you talking like that?
Oh, but I have to be completely monotone.
Right. So it feels weird. Like, yes, Zoro is stoic, but his voice is not always that it's not monotone like that.
Right.
Even if his face is stoic, like he still gives a little bit with the voice, It's almost like I want to understand Zoro better, and how I could do that in this portrayal is if he let his emotion out just a smidge just through his dialogue. But we don't get any of that.
Right.
So it's like when I see the emotion break through on his face and his voice follows, it's great. I live for those moments, yes. But then how come I only got 3 or 4 of those in this episode? Mm-hmm. If you're trying to be like the cool, pirate hunter Zoro, it's cool. Like, you don't have to smile all the time, but I would still like to hear something going on in your head. And it does feel like it feels like he's just leaning too much into the aloofness of Zorro. And I wish that if it had changed drastically through the episode, I would have been like, okay, he just is getting comfortable now. Now we're seeing him get comfortable, cool, like a character shift. But he shifts like in and out of it so much that it is a little confusing. Characters like Shanks, Alvida, Kobe, Helmeppo, I think are portrayed accurately. But I almost wanted them to ramp it up just a smidge. I feel like Alvida, she's one of the first like villains that you see in the show, and in this episode, and we get this time where we really could hate her guts, and we don't get to explore that very much. I feel like we had the time. They could have ramped up just her portrayal just a little bit, so that like even just the lines that are already exist, that as she's speaking to Luffy and Kobe and the rest of her crew, you know, the delivery of those lines fell a little bit shallow, I guess. It's like, oh, okay, like I get that you're a bad guy because of what you're saying, but I don't feel like you're a bad guy because of how you're saying it.
Right.
It's like, you know, I feel like Helmeppo almost gives us more of that, where we're like, okay, yeah, I want to punch this guy in the face. Like, you know, but then he has this weird moment where it's like, he has this weird like confrontation with Zorro that doesn't make any sense. And then I'm like, I don't understand how the character suddenly is like so macho, and then he's like not actually macho. Like, I understand that it's all a facade, but how they like reveal that his like confidence is all a facade felt so weird to me. So I didn't care for that either. Again, I think design-wise, he looks great. But really the big problem here is Luffy. I feel like this is the most inconsistent Luffy. And when I say that, it's kind of like what you said, where he's not quite serious and he's not quite an airhead. So we get this weird mix of Luffy. And Luffy is a friendly, charming idiot. And should be a friendly, charming idiot. Part of the appeal, I think, of the Straw Hats is that their captain is the dumbest one on the ship.
Yeah.
And everybody else on the ship is doing, like, the thinking. And Luffy has his goal, and I'm not going to say he's a total idiot, but Luffy has 2 brain cells he keeps in reserve, okay? Like, he only pulls them out when absolutely necessary. And those moments that he does are good, and we want those. But we don't need those brain cells constantly firing in order for us to, like, have a working crew. That's why the other crew members are there. They serve their purpose better when Luffy is being silly. Well, and Luffy's not silly in this portrayal.
And another thing I feel like they tried to, like, establish is Luffy is the biggest ditz, but he's got the best heart. Mm-hmm. Like, he's gonna bend over backwards and go to the ends of the earth to help you out, because that's what good pirates are supposed to do. And I'm a good pirate, you know. So that's kind of his like mantra, is like, I don't know how I'm gonna get there, and we'll probably make 1,000 mistakes along the way, but you know what, it's probably all gonna work out, and I'm here for you. And so that's why he's the leader of his crew, is because his heart's in the right place.
Right.
And so they tried to establish that with his relationship with Kobe, but then again, like you're saying, he's never has these moments where he's just like a silly airhead.
Right. And so, and like another big part of Luffy's character that's established from the beginning in the anime and manga is that he is insanely optimistic. And there's dialogue in this episode that would suggest that Luffy is stupidly optimistic, but he never lives, he doesn't, when he's not saying the optimistic thing, we don't see the optimism in him anywhere else. But it's like, that optimism is so deeply rooted in the character of Luffy that, like, they could be in the middle of the worst fight that the Straw Hats have seen, and Luffy will find some reason to like giggle at something. And so you don't see that a lot in this first episode's portrayal of Luffy. It's almost like he's just a little too serious. And he doesn't feel as light, he doesn't feel as like airy. He's friendly. He is friendly. I'll give him that, but he's just a little too self-aware, I think. And so it doesn't feel super true to the Luffy that we know from the source material, who is a charming idiot who has no idea what's going on unless someone tells him point blank. And that's part of the appeal. Like, it's part of the dynamic of the Straw Hats as a crew, is that Luffy's silly, but we love him anyway because he loves us. And he loves being a pirate. And he just really wants to be, king of the pirates. And he has a heavy sense of justice, which is another thing we don't see a lot in this first episode, is his sense of justice. We see it more in Kid Luffy, which I think is a decent flashback. But then if Kid Luffy has such a high sense of justice, seeing Shanks being, bullied basically by these other pirates, why are we not seeing that translated into adult Luffy? That's obviously a very important part of Luffy's character. Why is it not coming through? So all of my critiques pretty much come down to just the fact that, like, Luffy feels really inconsistent, and Zoro feels like he's, like, trying to emulate anime Zoro too much. So those are my biggest critiques, but I still think that this is kind of where they did best. So 2 out of 3 points for characters for me.
Alrighty, so next category is aesthetics. Out of a total possible score of 2, I give this 1 out of 2 points. So a lot of what you said about the characters I attributed to the aesthetics. The characters, the costumes are just fantastic. And the way that they made some of these costumes that they pulled straight from the anime work on a live human is just incredible. Like you mentioned, the Captain Morgan and his axe hand and his metal jaw, like, that could have looked really, really hokey. I do think that the jaw doesn't translate super well. There's moments where you can see his lower lip, and his teeth kind of through that prosthetic piece. But I love that they did on-camera prosthetics for that. Yeah. I have a huge respect for that. A lot of the sets also look fantastic. It really is building this world and making this really immersive. So you kind of get this sort of like Pirates of the Caribbean vibe mixed with this kind of cartoonish feel. So the colors are really vivid, so that when Shanks, like you said, has bright red hair, it doesn't look out of place. Even Nami's bright orange hair doesn't look out of place. So, but the colors aren't all so cartoonish that now you don't feel like you're watching real people. You feel like you're watching, I don't know, some kind of cartoon filter over the whole show. So the sets and the costumes, just absolutely fantastic. The Wanted posters, I love how they use that to help tell the story. That the Wanted posters, which are really integral in the anime and marketing for the anime and manga, how that just looks just like it came right off the page of the manga. And I just really like that they have all these little nods like that. The cinematography is done really good. The cinematic shots feel like you're watching an anime, but it's not so jarring that it distracts you from what you're watching. I don't know if this is the case, but it felt like the intro with Gold Roger felt like a shot-for-shot reproduction of the intro from the anime.
Very close.
And yet it didn't feel like, oh, they're just reenacting a cartoon. It felt like cinema.
Yeah.
Felt like you were watching a TV show, a well done TV show. So the music also, I think, is really good. There's parts where it kind of changes based on what kind of setting you're in, or whether or not you're watching a flashback. The music's done really well. I did think there were some problems with the sound mixing. I've mentioned this before, but a pet peeve of mine is when I'm watching dialogue, and then an explosion or combat happens and I have to turn the TV volume down. There were a couple moments where I felt like I couldn't hear the dialogue during a combat scene or during a really loud action scene. The dialogue was overshadowed by the sound effects. So that was just a little bit... two reasons that I really couldn't give this full points, although I do think visually is really where the show shines. The CGI is really distracting for me in this episode. Shots of the boats in the intro, it's very clearly CG. The crowd in the intro scene, it's a CGI crowd. It just looks like a CGI crowd. It doesn't even look like high quality PS5 graphics. It looks like we went back to PS3 graphics. And I mean, it's pretty distracting. The other reason that I do think there's some problems with this visually is the fight choreography. I think there are parts where it's really good, but then there's parts where it's really bad. And an example, the very first kind of combat we're introduced, well, I guess technically it's not, but the combat between Zoro and number 7 is so lame. That is probably the lamest sword fight I've ever seen on a TV show. And I don't understand how in the world you are convincing me that these are two sword masters fighting when it looks like two 10-year-olds in the backyard. I mean, it's just like the choreo, and it's not the actor's fault. It's the choreography. And I understand that it's kind of like an anime thing for somebody to try and go for a huge overhead blow and then they get cut in half in the middle because both their arms were above their heads. But that's one area where I feel like this is not going to translate super well to live action. Maybe we should tweak things a little bit. Maybe we shouldn't have him stand there with his arms above his head for a good 5 beats and then he gets cut in half. Like, maybe we should try and make this fit the media or the medium that we're portraying here. It was just, I was just shocked watching that. I was like, is this really the choreography? And this is the first one. This is like the first time we see Zoro in combat, which he's supposed to be training to be the world's greatest swordsman. And this is the kind of combat he's having. Well, he's already the world's greatest swordsman. He doesn't have a whole lot of competition here. I mean, it's just not believable. It does improve in the bar fight scene and when they're in the yard fighting
the Marine yard.
Captain Morgan. But there are parts of the combat where it just feels corny. And people are going to come at me and be like, oh, you clearly have never watched the combat in an anime. It's supposed to be over the top, blah, blah, blah. Like, okay, but this isn't an anime. We're watching a live action TV show. So Netflix, this was your job. You're changing other things to translate to live action. So this was your job, was to make things translate a little better in the live action setting. So again, I don't have a huge issue with it personally because I know that this is coming from an anime, but I think to be fair and critical of the medium that we're talking about here, that's your job, is to take what translates well in a cartoon and then make it fit live action. And the combat, I think, is one of those moments where you really need to do that. And, you know, we've established that there are some things that break reality, like Luffy's abilities to stretch and things like that. There are things that break reality, but then certain parts are grounded in reality. So, you know, gravity is still a thing. So I think mostly just the CGI effects and the combat are two big reasons where I feel like this falls short, especially because both of those things are so heavily featured in this episode, and I know they'll be featured later on in the show. But it's really not terrible. I just think that, you know, of all the TV shows and movies that have had sword combat in them, this is not anything new. So, but I will say I got to give them props because I was concerned about how they were going to translate Zoro's triple swordsmanship, his three sword
style.
And it actually worked pretty well because I don't know if, I mean, you know, I'm sure there's plenty of children out there that have tried putting, you know, toy katanas in their mouth like Zorro, and it's kind of difficult. But I mean, I wouldn't know from experience or anything.
Right.
But,
I
you
feel
know,
like you're revealing secrets. To the
maybe,
internet.
could be, but you know, I'm surprised. It worked out really well, and they did a good job with that. But so another thing I think where in aesthetics where you have to translate, you know, you're translating something from anime, and it doesn't necessarily translate into the TV or film live action genre. I feel like the shot in this first episode where there's a kind of a nudity shot, and I know that nudity is really prominent in anime. It's kind of a cultural thing. I understand that. But again, I just don't think it fits. It feels kind of gratuitous. Like it doesn't really fit. It wasn't necessary. And it almost feels like, you know how you'll watch a TV show and there's like, it's like they try and throw a shock factor into the pilot episode, and then it's that kind of shock never occurs for the rest of the show. I feel like it was almost like that.
Yeah.
And I kind of felt played. Like you're just throwing this nudity shot in and just to play me, and then you're probably not going to have any more for the rest, or are you setting me up for kind of what to expect? So I'm not saying that. I mean, I don't like watching that kind of stuff in TV shows anyways, and I know
Yeah.
you don't really, you know, it's just unnecessary, but it really felt unnecessary here.
Yeah, I have to agree. I think it's like one of those things where it was like, was there a little bit of a character moment there? Yes, but did that have to be included? Absolutely not. That didn't have to be included at all. And I think that we could have gotten the effect of like the character that was involved and without having to see any of that. And there's so many ways that you can trick a camera now, where it's like the implication could be there, and so we see the embarrassment of the character, but we don't have to see any unnecessary and visual. And like they could have put a plant in the way or a desk or something like that, and you know, it's like the camera's hiding behind it. Like there's so many ways that they could have done that to get the same effect without all of the parents who have maybe young kids that are watching this with them suddenly having to slap hands over eyes.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
So yeah, I agree with you on that.
Yeah. So that was just another area where I feel like Netflix, your job is to translate anime into live action. And again, you're missing the mark here, because even if you have, and I feel like a lot of times when anime is brought from Japan to the US, there's a lot of censorship that has to happen because of the cultural and censorship differences. And so again, I feel like, okay, well, you know, the way that the Japanese anime is respectful of American, you know, nudity / censorship laws, like you could have done the same thing. Mm-hmm. Like you could have had something a little more tasteful rather than what you showed there. So, and that just kind of bothered me, because I just felt like it was gratuitous and, you know, just there for shock factor and not really there for storytelling.
Agreed.
1 out of 2 for aesthetics for me.
All right. So I gave it 1.5 out of 2 for aesthetics. I really am not going to take a lot of time, because I don't want to beat to death things that you've already said. Shot for shot opening sequence honestly took my breath away, and I got very excited seeing that's like the first thing of the first episode, and I was like, oh shoot, this might be way better than I thought. Visually though, I think that this show's pretty consistent. I think that it is probably the most consistent aspect of this show. It visually feels so real. It feels like a real place, and the people in it fit, and everything looks cohesive and looks like it belongs. Even when it is ridiculous, it somehow all fits. I think the sets are fantastic. I think the lighting is fantastic. I do think the CG leaves a little to be desired. I was surprised. I thought that the rubber effects, Luffy's rubber effects, was going to be my biggest issue with the CG, and it's actually more of like the sea and ships were a little bit worse for me than the stretch. There's a part though where the CG is weird because Alvida throws something on Luffy's head, and Luffy's head caves in because he's rubber, but so does his hat.
Yes.
It takes no damage. The hat is not rubber. The hat is straw. If the hat got hit with something heavy, it would splinter. So that part didn't make any sense. So that was bad. That was just bad. Combat, again, starts out cringe, ends up okay. At least there was a progression, but I was very nervous the first time I saw. I was like, oh no. Because yes, anime fight scenes are gonna be over the top and they take forever, but that's one thing that needs to be adapted to the new medium. It just has to. Otherwise, people who have never seen One Piece are gonna watch this show and they're gonna be like, oh, okay, I can't handle this. It's too campy. Let me move on. We don't want that. We don't want people to move on. We want people to enjoy. So, not a big fan of that. The Wanted posters are fantastic. Yes, I love it. I also think it's a great way for us to establish important pirate characters in the world. Because it's not every character that gets a Wanted poster, but everybody notable in the world that has a bounty on their head gets a Wanted poster. And I think that's a great intro. Like, oh, we're about to see Alvida. Here's Alvida's Wanted poster. Those sorts of things I think are just so fantastic. And then costumes are good. Score is really nice. Sound mixing, yes, definitely a problem. There was lots of loud louds and quiet quiets, and I would like that to be a little more balanced. I don't want to have to. I hate when I have to do anything to my volume bar. After I've said it at the beginning, I don't want to touch it again.
Yeah.
And so please quit making me do that. Too much work. That was work you should have done in editing. Don't make me do it now. I appreciate that they have used a few practical effects and prosthetics. I think that's really good. I'm hoping that, as the show goes on, that some of the things like CGI and combat do get better. I do think it happened a bit through the first episode, so I'm hopeful that it will continue through the rest of the series. I don't really have much to say other than that, but I thought aesthetics were pretty dang nice, so 1.5 points out of 2.
Okay, next category is personal taste and preference, and if you've been keeping track, you won't be surprised. My score out of total possible score of 2 is 1 out of 2 points. So for all the shade I've been throwing at the show, I did actually enjoy it. I watched One Piece as a kid. It wasn't sequentially. I didn't watch a ton of episodes. This show is actually better than I expected, but the only reason I would continue watching is because I know some of what comes later. But this show mostly feels like a nice exterior, like a beautiful Christmas present with just very little substance inside. So I would continue to watch. I did enjoy it. I did think, visually is really, really good. But if this was my only exposure to One Piece, I would not keep watching it. I would think that this was a dumb kids show and that they just made this for kids, because it's just, which is a shame, because the manga and the anime is not for kids. I mean, kids could read it and watch it and enjoy it, but it really is more mature than that. Mm-hmm. But I did enjoy it. I did think that there were some good moments and there were some good parts. It was neat seeing how they decided to translate cartoon characters into live action form, and I think they did a very good job of the visual translation. But unfortunately, I think it's problematic when you try and cram so many characters and so much information into such a small span of time. I feel like they could have easily fixed this by just having you follow Luffy for the whole first episode, and maybe he only meets Zoro, or only meets Nami, or only meets Kobe, and maybe there's only one person he meets and he has one adversary, and then he just slowly builds from there. And I don't think that would have been a problem. Maybe they didn't want to do that because fans would have been so mad that their favorite character wasn't in yet, but I don't know. I think that it was decent. I don't think it was anything earth-shattering. I think overall I would probably just go back and watch the cartoon instead of just, I hate that I just called it a cartoon, but I would just go back and watch the anime because I feel like I would get a better experience from that. But 1 out of 2.
Okay. I also gave it 1 out of 2 points for personal taste and preference. As I stated in the beginning, I love One Piece. It's one of the animes that I've committed the most time to seeing. It's a favorite of mine. I enjoy talking about it. This episode does feel like a decent intro to the world, but I truly worry for the long-term storytelling with the chosen pacing and the plot changes that they've shown just in this first episode. I think this is going to end up being a time will tell situation this whole season. I am going to continue watching it because I thought it was entertaining. And because I have the prior knowledge, I have all the things I need to get the fullest enjoyment out of it. But I know that only applies to me. It doesn't apply to everybody. I'm going to give it a continued shot. I'm going to watch it through. It could end up episode 8 blowing my mind. And I'm like, whoa, this is one of the best adaptations ever. Maybe we're getting off to a rocky start. But for this podcast episode, we're only talking about the first episode. So if I have to judge everything based on just that, then I'm going to say that, like, it's a little worrisome, just as a fan in general of the world of One Piece. I think that, is it going to be something where after watching this episode, I sit down and I go, what's better? The first, 7 episodes of the anime that they crammed into this one adaptation episode or this adaptation episode? Obviously, I'm going to prefer the anime. It was just paced so much better. We were given a lot of emotional depth moments for characters that we didn't get the chance to do that here. So my preference is going to lean toward the anime. But I don't want that to sound so harsh to say that I don't think you should give it a shot. I think that if you don't know anything about One Piece and watching something live action on Netflix is a more palatable way for you to dive into the world, go for it. One Piece is a daunting anime to start from the beginning, especially when you learn how many episodes there are. There are a lot of people that don't even start One Piece because it's such a long-running show. So if you're like, well, I'm never going to dip my toes into One Piece because I don't want to commit to that kind of time. Maybe this is the way for you to do that. If you're interested in the world and the characters and want to get a taste of what the story is, maybe this is your gateway to that. So, but for me, comparing the two is very hard not to do. And because of that, the better comparison is always going to be the anime for me. So I couldn't give it full points. I had to give it 1 out of 2.
Alrighty. Last category is creativity. So total possible score of 1. I gave this 0 out of 1 points for creativity. Netflix gets no creativity points for me. I'm sorry. It's not sorry, actually, at all. They're adapting into live action what has already been exceptionally creative in the manga and the anime. This, all the legwork and everything that merits points for creativity exists in the manga and the anime. That's just, Netflix didn't come up with this story. They didn't come up with these characters. They didn't come up with the aesthetics. They didn't come up with the world, the lore. They didn't create anything. They're just adapting into live action. And although I do think they did an okay job with it visually, they haven't done anything in this episode different enough that, like, oh, they did that differently. That's a really creative spin on things. Oh, wow, that was really smart for them to translate this a little differently onto live action versus an animated format. They haven't done anything of that nature. They've either mirrored the anime or they've just condensed and overlapped parts of the anime and the manga. So I don't think it deserves any points for creativity for that. And unfortunately, and this is going to be a hot take, this really just feels like a cash grab. This feels like they're just, people have wanted a live action One Piece for decades, and Netflix is like, oh, we'll do it, and we've got the budget, so we'll make some money by getting the rights to it. They just haven't done anything new. It just feels like they're just doing it because it's fan service and the fans want it, and they know that there's enough fans that the fans will watch it. And if they keep it close enough to the source material, then fans won't complain and they'll continue to watch it. And again, like I said, if we were ranking the manga and the anime on creativity, absolutely, they would get full points. I mean, how could you not? But for Netflix, sorry, you don't get any points for creativity for me.
Okay. I gave it half a point out of 1, and that all hinges on the fact that the creator of One Piece, Oda, had a lot of control over this show. So while I may not necessarily agree with some of the things that were changed, I am grateful that he was given the opportunity to have a say-so, because who knows the world better than him? So it's not Netflix that I'm giving that credit to, it's Oda. And because he was closely involved with the Netflix adaptation, that half point is strictly being given straight to him. I think that this is I mentioned this in the last category, but I think this could be a good gateway for people who have no knowledge of the show. And I think they're using their like visual and cinematography resources very well. There are lots of beautiful shots that are very creative. However, I'm worried for some of the like pacing liberties that they're taking. And I think that it's squashing creativity because of that pacing. So apparently the rumor is that they've already finished and completed scripts for a season 2, and Netflix is teasing a green light, but that hasn't actually been confirmed by the company.
I think it has been confirmed.
I just looked it up.
Oh, okay.
And it's been reported by a few entertainment outlets.
Gotcha.
But no word from Netflix themselves yet.
Gotcha.
But I would not be surprised if that comes very soon. So half a point out of 1 for me for creativity.
Alrighty.
So what's your final score?
My final score for the Netflix iteration of One Piece Season 1, Episode 1 is 4 out of 10.
Mine is 6 out of 10, which when I went in, I thought my score was going to be much higher, to be honest. But it's just kind of okay for me. Like, I enjoyed myself, but I didn't love everything. Mm-hmm. So
yeah.
For me, I feel like 6 is very like harsh because I feel like I tend to be really like nice about things.
Yeah.
So I feel like 6 is kind of harsh for me, especially about something I know so much about. But,
yeah. Well, and I feel like, exactly like you're saying, this should be like a more easily digestible version of 1,200 episodes or however many episodes there are of the anime. But it just misses the mark a little bit. Maybe it is easier to watch as in length of time, but it's not easier to watch in the sense that you are trying to follow what's going on and care about what's going on.
Yeah.
So for that reason, I think, it would have gotten a higher score if they'd just condense things or change things around a little bit. But again, it's only the first episode. So, maybe it gets better.
Yeah,
we don't know.
It could get better. We'll see. All right. Any other thoughts before we move into lightning round?
No.
Okay. Lightning round question 1. Favorite character?
That's tough. Like in this specific, do I have to keep it to Netflix?
No, I guess not. You could say, like, if you just want to, if we could broaden it, I'll broaden it to, like, One Piece characters in general, even outside of this episode and adaptation.
How about we keep it to they're in this episode?
Okay.
That way you don't spoil any new characters.
Okay, that's fair.
So my favorite character from the anime is probably Zoro, and Nami, probably top 2. In this episode though, it probably would still be Nami. I feel like they did a good job of making her interesting, but I think Zoro's my favorite character in the anime. Yeah. Zoro and Nami compete for number 1.
Yeah, for me, it's the same. Well, not Nami. I love Nami, but Zoro is one of my 2 favorite Straw Hats in the anime. But I think in this episode, I think the most interesting character is Shanks. So I think he would be my favorite, which I also love anime Shanks. But I think in this episode, he was one of the best, like, versions of himself.
Yeah.
Okay, least favorite character?
I really hate to say it, but I think I'd have to say Luffy.
Okay.
I mean, I hate to say it. I don't want him to be my least favorite character.
What about in the anime at this point? Do you have a least favorite?
Of these characters?
Mm-hmm.
Probably Kobe. He's annoying.
Yeah. Sorry, what were you saying?
Doesn't he have like
Luffy?
a really like Well,
in the anime, Kobe cries like 7 times in the
Yeah.
first episode, and I hate him.
and what's the
I'm a
lady?
big Kobe hater.
The lady pirate Alvida.
Alvida.
I can't stand her.
Yeah.
I couldn't stand her in there. She's so annoying.
She's so annoying. So, what were you saying about Luffy? I'm sorry if I cut you off.
I don't know.
Just that he was a bad, like, depiction.
Yeah, I hate that he's my least favorite character because I don't dislike him in the anime. But it's just, and I don't know, maybe it gets better. I don't know, but it's just he's missing the mark here.
Yeah. My least favorite character in the anime at this point is Kobe. In this adaptation, it's Helmeppo. Like, bro, I hate that man.
Yeah.
Gross. Okay, next question. Favorite story moment?
I honestly don't know if I even have one. I guess if I had to pick one, I would have to say when Nami's on the rowboat and she steals the ship from the guys.
Okay. Mine is probably when Nami knocks out the Marine guy to steal his uniform and sneaks in to get the map, to find the map. I just like the moment of like seeing how clever Nami is.
I really did think this was clever, but when she says to that guy right before she knocks him out to steal his uniform, another guy walks by and she says he's too tall.
Yeah.
And you connect it that the reason she said he's too tall is because she can't wear his uniform.
Right. And like when she first says it, you think that she's like giving her preferences for like what man should buy her a drink at the bar.
Right.
But that's not it at all.
Yeah. I thought that was really clever. I don't know if that's taken from the anime or not, but
I don't think so.
It was very clever writing. I thought that was done very well.
Okay. Did you have a favorite special effects or aesthetic or visual moment?
I really do think that, as much as I said that I think the CGI is problematic, that Luffy's stretch really looks seamless.
Yeah.
I was very impressed. I feel like that's where all their CGI budget went into. That would probably be special effects that I was really impressed by. Yeah, it would probably be that one. I also was really surprised just the costumes that was just I thought looked really, really good. The costumes look really good. I thought the opening scene was just done really well. Except I hate that crowd shot at the end. I really hated it. It just looked so horrible. But the way that Gold Roger looked and just the shots, the cinematic shots, just really reflected the anime. I thought that was done really well. But I would probably say I was very surprised that Luffy's CG looked as good as it did. And the way that like in the anime, his clothing doesn't stretch. But the way they kept it to where somehow it still works out that like his shirt kind of raises up above, like, while if he stretches really long, his shirt kind of lifts up a little bit, things like that, which still looked, it still looked pretty true to the anime, but then also looked realistic.
Yeah, I think my pick for like favorite visual moment is the shot for shot opening with Goldie Roger. I was just so happy to see that. And it just felt like a really nice way to establish that, like, yes, this is the adaptation of what you've come to know and love as an anime. So visually, I just thought that was so nice. Okay, last question. This is a fun one. If you were on Luffy's crew, if you were a Straw Hat, what position or job would you want to have? Aside from captain. You can't be captain. Luffy's captain. That's the caveat.
I mean, what jobs are there?
I mean, they kind of make up some.
Oh, okay.
But, like, what sounds fun? What do you want to do on the ship?
I mean, whatever Zoro's job sounds cool.
He's like the brawn.
Yeah.
He's just the brawn of the ship.
It'd be pretty cool.
Yeah.
It's like the intimidation factor.
Yeah.
I was gonna say I could be like the doctor.
Yeah.
But what they did on the ship is cutting people's legs off and stuff. And I don't really know if I want to do that. That just sounds kind of extreme.
I guess.
But, I feel like I could be useful.
Yeah.
If I was the doctor. But I would want, like, Zoro's job.
Yeah.
I mean.
For me, as long as my vertigo did not betray me, I would want to be like Master Rigger and Lookout. Wouldn't that be fun?
Yeah.
To like hang out in the crow's nest all the time. I would just like bring books and snacks up there. Just be like, I'm having a great time.
That'd be like your dream job.
Yeah.
You could work on your tan while you're up there.
Yeah. Throw me the sunblock.
Yeah. Exactly.
All right. Anything else you want to talk about?
No.
Okay. Well, thank you guys so much for joining us on this episode. Hope you had a good time. Feel free to tell us why if you didn't. Links to show notes, Patreon, socials, suggestion box, all on our website, which is lionandmousepodcast.com. You can review the episode on whichever podcast platform you prefer. Thank you so much to those who have been reviewing those episodes and our show in general. We really appreciate that. Thank you so much for listening, and we will catch you in the next one.